That was higher than I thought it was going to be for Elena. Good for her? Yikes for her? Hi, welcome to Gracie Talks. My name's Gracie. We're going to be doing a statistical breakdown of the Vampire Diaries today. This concept started with wanting to look at the big franchise of the early 2000s, and I was trying to figure out what the chances would be that you would actually survive in a world like that, because I always wanted to be in the books, but when you look at it, they were really dangerous. So I did one video on the dystopian YA franchises, mainly focusing on Hunger Games. This one is going to be looking at the vampire genre. We are going to be using the Vampire Diaries. We're going to get right into it. I knew with the vampire genre, there was not going to be an easy way to say what are the chances that I would survive. With Hunger Games, I was able to say what are the chances that we survive because the list that I had was a list of people who had won the Hunger Games. So I could take the information of people who won and say, okay, now this is my chance of winning. The Vampire Diaries, the data that I have is not people who survived, it is people who did not survive. So we're going to be looking at the opposite in this video, which is given that I'm not going to survive, how am I going to go out? We're using Excel and math for all of this. We're looking at it by the numbers, and I do have a model for this one as well in terms of what would our fate be. Let's get right into it. This is the data that I had. This is going to be the breakdown of every single death that occurred in the Vampire Diaries. It's just written like this. It's going to go episode by episode. First assumption we're making, we are going to be treating this data set as accurate. I did deviate from it. I will note all the deviations that I made. This is going to be a comprehensive list. It includes unnamed characters. It includes on-screen and off-screen deaths. It also includes animals. So this is what we're working with. And then because I am a god in Excel, I broke it down like this. You don't need to worry. You don't need to worry what all this is doing. I built keys for everything. Listen, I did it so you don't have to. But this is how I broke down the data. Disclaimer right now, spoilers for Vampire Diaries. Also, there's going to be mention of violence. It's all fictional violence. It's violence that was in the TV show. This channel does not support or condone violence of any kind. Safe and respectful place for all, you know the drill. I would have preferred the approach where we could look at where the chances of surviving, but the data just wasn't there, and I am bound to the data. Diving right in. These are the raw stats, just on their own, straight from that article, including unnamed people, on-screen, off-screen, animals. This is a breakdown based on the people that have... I'm going to try to be tricky with this because, again, brand new to YouTube figuring this out. Please do not get annoyed with me that I'm sort of talking around it. I'm going to do my best. We're going to try and still be concise. Of the people who did not survive, who was the character that made it that way? Who did that? How did they do that? Were they being compelled? We're going to look at all of that. So we have victims and then we have perpetrators. This is ranking them by perpetrator. And you can see that Lily Salvatore is the top. This is skewed. I don't like it. I did end up removing this. This was because she was given credit for killing 3,000 people off screen. And it was mentioned in some episode. They're not characters that we know. It skewed the data. If we were to include the 3,000 for Lily Salvatore, then when we get to the model, we're just going to say, okay, I've met my end in this show. Who did it? Who took me out? How did they do it? In terms of using the probability to actually model that, if we included Lily Salvatore, it would skew the data way too much in a way that I don't think is accurate. So I did end up removing the 3,000 unnamed people for Lily Salvatore. As much as I love seeing a woman on the top of this list, I just don't think that it was accurate. I also removed all of the unnamed people. I did not remove the unnamed people in terms of the victims, but I did in terms of the perpetrator, because unnamed people being the perpetrator is not one person. It would be a ton of different people. It ultimately just didn't end up mattering. I took it out. Self and accident did stay. I left them in. We'll get into that in a second. Using the raw info before I made any of the changes that I made, I did go ahead and pull all of the main characters to look at their stats. Of the main characters, we've got Damon at rank 3rd, but he would be behind Lily Salvatore and unnamed people. It's not really accurate. Damon was 3, Stefan was 4. I have comments on this in terms of who the biggest baddie was between Damon and Stefan. I have comments. Damon and Stefan made it into triple digits. Enzo and Klaus also pretty high, and then everybody else I'd say is at a normal number. Elena's at 7. That was higher than I thought it was going to be for Elena. Good for her? Yikes for her? Of the main characters, sorry if your favorite is not on this list, Jeremy, Bonnie, Matt, Tyler are all tied for last place with 5. Over the course of 8 seasons, I'd say that sounds about right. That seems like a normal amount for how long the show ended up going. One last data set, just looking at the raw data. We have not moved into the cleaned up and edited data yet. We are still with the raw data set, the compulsion count. These are the people that would ultimately still be responsible for somebody not surviving, but not because they directly did it themselves. They used compulsion. Sybil's at the top of the list. This makes sense. When she comes in pretty hard with a lot of compulsion. 100 of these were Ethan Maxwell. Ethan Maxwell rang the Maxwell bell, which ended up taking out 100 witches. He was being sired by Sybil and Celine at the time. I mainly gave it to Sybil because she was the main one I thought of, Sybil and Celine. I gave it to Sybil. And then 60 of them were Damon and Enzo. Now we're getting into the cleaned up data set. So I took out Lily Salvatore, I took out the unnamed people, I also took out animals. It included animals, for example, Damon makes a joke about Stefan sucking a squirrel's blood for sustenance because Stefan isn't drinking human blood, and that was included in the article under the stats. I took stuff like that out. So I removed the animals, not because we don't care about animals on this page, you know that we do. But for the stats, what's our fate going to be if we were just dropped into this show? The animals are not going to end up playing a role in that. Sorry, took them out. Zoom out with me. Remember what we're doing. We're going to meet our fate in this show. So statistically speaking, who did it? How did they do it? So who took out the most people in the show with this cleaned up data set? Who's the baddest of them all? It's Damon. I feel like we knew it was going to be Damon. I thought it could have been Stefan because of his Ripper era. But because Damon was the bad boy for pretty much the entire show, I still had a hunch that he was going to pull through. Out of everybody that was taken out, some of them were taken out by one person, some of them were taken out by multiple, so I did end up breaking it down into primary and secondary, and then we looked at the totals for everyone. So of the totals, this is going to include either being compelled or forced to do something, so it doesn't necessarily mean that Damon is responsible for the most amount of people not surviving, but it was done by his hand. And y'all don't even worry, because yes, the model does take this into account. Model takes everything into account. Damon is the baddest of them all. Stefan is second. Damon is the only one to cross that 200 threshold, so I guess, again, either congratulations or yikes. How do we feel about that? For people who like Damon, does this make you like him more or less? If you like him, then I'm assuming this makes you like him more. If you like Stefan, does this make you like him less, that he was at number one? Let me know. Although that does lead me to my next point. If you look at compulsions, part of what is driving Damon's stats with this is those 60 people that Sybil was controlling him. So Damon's count is 214, but 60 of those were compulsion. That is almost a third of his total stats he was not ultimately responsible for. That is big. Stefan at 192, how many of those was he not responsible for? Only 2. So if you look at it that way, Damon was responsible for 154 counts. I'm using counts because I'm trying to be careful with this. Stefan was responsible for 190, which would put Stefan above Damon. I loved that because I do love Stefan. I'm not saying which one I ultimately ended up shipping. I do not want the girlies coming for me. This channel is not monetizable yet. I cannot be catching strays for free. I love Damon's character. I love Stefan's character. I liked that Damon had the highest stats, but Stefan was the one who ultimately bears the responsibility for the most. It was just interesting to me that they kind of shared first place, if you think about it. I touched on this already. Ethan Maxwell's up there with 100. All of those 100 were when he was being sirened by Sybil and Celine. We can look at the entire list going down, but I did want to do the method. This is mainly just for the main characters. I pulled the method for each one. Of all of the people that Damon took out, what was the number one method that he used? Blood-sucking. Makes sense, vampires. I do have a complete list of all of the methods used along with their probability of happening, so you will see what all the options are. But for now, we're just looking at the most popular one for each person. Stefan, blood-sucking. Ethan Maxwell with 100. Burned alive. These are the witches that he took out by ringing the bell. Enzo's total count is 79. He was more than Klaus. I was surprised by that. My guesses were Stefan and Damon right at number 1 and 2. It was a toss-up for me which one was going to end up coming out on top, and it's funny because it could go either way. And then I thought Klaus was going to be second. Ethan Maxwell, he's in there for the stats because he should be included. I don't really care that much about his stats, so I'm sort of ignoring him. So the main characters, you got Damon and Stefan, or Stefan and Damon, depending on which way you want it to go. And then I am surprised that Enzo ended up on top of Klaus. What was his preferred way of taking people out? Blood-sucking, also neck snapping. That's the other really big one that you see in the stats, which we knew. If you watch the show, you know that they're just snapping necks left and right. Just left and right. Klaus coming in at 5th place, blood-sucking, his preferred way. We can chat self and accident now. An example of self would be people sacrificing themselves. For example, towards the end of the show, Damon specifically ran his car into the Mystic Grill, ultimately sacrificing himself and Elena. Those both went towards the self stats. For stuff like that, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't that count as a Damon stat or an Elena stat? Why are you putting it under self? Because the amount of incidents that end up happening because someone has to take themselves out. In my brain, what are the chances that I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to have to sacrifice myself to save others or take myself out because I'm trying to do a spell and I drain myself? The self stats sort of still are going to represent what the chances are that that ends up being the way that you would go. I'm trying to talk about this as openly as I can. So I didn't put it with the character stats. I did put it as what are the chances I'm going to be in a situation where I have to take myself out for the greater good. So that's why I left the self stats in. Same thing for accident as well. Say a character fell down the stairs and ended up taking themselves out that way. I didn't give them that stat for, oh, they took somebody out. It's just an accident. So statistically speaking, what are the chances that I'm going to have an accident and that's how I get taken out? I left it in for that reason. You can disagree with how I did this because you didn't spend a month working on this. I did. I get to make the rules. I will take you down the list now. Nothing super meaningful here. I don't think this is a complete list. So this is going to show everybody, a couple compulsions, a couple possessions, nothing stand out. Only people who have at least one stat are on the list, so it's a complete list of everybody who took somebody out. There were 90 people total on this list. Everybody that just had a stat of 1 ended up tied for 58th place. We've talked about whether or not they were being controlled. This is going to come into play specifically when we look at the model. So who took me out? Okay, were they being controlled or not? That's going to be accounted for statistically. The other stat, because this show loves to bring people back, was their victim resurrected or not? If you're into the Damon-Stefan rivalry, this is going to be interesting. Damon had the most resurrections. Of the 214 people that he took out, 18 of them came back. Statistically, that's only 8%. But if you compare that with Stefan did do better in terms of keeping people down. He had 7 people come back. It's a 4% resurrection rate on his incidents. When it comes to the self-caused incidents or the accidents, you got about a 20% rate of coming back. That's pretty good. If you do have to be taken out by a character and you want to come back, Klaus, 29%. You have a 1 in 3 chance of being resurrected if Klaus is the reason that you got taken out. Klaus was supposed to be a big bad, but I'm just not seeing it in the stats. To clarify, Damon had the highest amount of people come back at 18. Klaus had the highest percentage at 29% of the people that he ended up coming back. This is just looking at those top perpetrators though, because if you move down, you will see some other people with some pretty high stats in terms of their victims coming back. The percentage of resurrections is going to increase if you took out a smaller amount of people, just naturally. Lark's total count was at 11, 4 of them came back, 36%. Silas had 10, 27% of those came back. Rebecca has a 13% resurrection rate, so compared to Klaus, she's doing better in terms of keeping people down. Carolyn is 25%, Elena is 29%. Elena's preferred method, by the way, neck snapping, one of the most common ones, and then also stabbing. Aggressive. It has been a while since I watched the show all the way through. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing this, but Mikhail, he was the patriarch of the Michelson family, so he ended up taking all of them out. They all came back. He's sitting at about 83% resurrection rate. Bunny's got 60%. A lot of the stats that she ended up getting were from spells. She ended up being responsible for Jeremy at one point. So a lot of her stats were more so technically she's taking people out, but that's not really the goal. So a lot of them ended up coming back 60%. As you move down, you get into people that only have a stat of 1. If that person came back, you're looking at 100% chance of resurrection. So you can see all of that down here. Stay with me, you're doing great. We're gonna look at the victim side now. Of all of the characters who got taken out the most, who took them out, were they resurrected? Number 1, guesses? Any guesses? Who do you think? Keep in mind, this is going to include every incident. Number 1, who got taken out the most? Stefan. So who took out the most people? If you take away the fact that Damon was compelled for 60 of those, Stefan. And who got taken out the most? Stefan. He is dominating the stats. He got taken out 9 times out of all of the people that were taken out, and every single incident of someone being taken out, that was 3%. 3% of the total incidents were Stefan. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. That is so hard to say fast. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Spoiler, he got taken out 9 times, he got resurrected 8 times. At the very end of the show, he dies, he doesn't make it. Hated that. How did you guys feel about it? Of the 9 times that Stefan got taken out, who took him out the most? Damon. Makes sense. Who got taken out the second most? Alaric. Thinking back, it does make sense. I do feel like he died a lot of times. He got taken out 8 times. He got resurrected 8 times. He ultimately still survived the show. Who took him out the most times? Damon. Speak of the devil, Damon himself is tied for second with Alaric. Got taken out 8 times, resurrected 7 times. Who took Damon out the most? Also Damon. That was hilarious to me when I was going through. All of these people, who took him out the most? Stefan, it was Damon. Alaric, it was Damon. Damon, it was Damon. We got Raina Cruz in 4th place. Who took her out the most? Damon. I thought Jeremy was going to be higher up there because at the beginning of the season, I've seen the beginning part of the show way more than I've seen the ending part of the show. Feels like Jeremy gets taken out a lot. Catherine also got taken out 5 times. She's tied with Jeremy. Who took her out the most? Stefan. Was not expecting that. Thought for sure it was going to be Damon. This tracks with the fact that Damon was vicious and a monster and the bad guy, but he was in love with Catherine. Stefan was not as starry-eyed over Catherine as Damon was, at least in the first couple of seasons, the way that it was presented. I mean, they were both infatuated with her at first, but over time, Stefan ended up being like, maybe not into it. He was responsible for taking Catherine out the most times. I am wanting more female representation in terms of people dominating the stats. Victims list tied for 7th place is Elena, Kai, Matt, and Sybil. For people who don't have a leading perpetrator, so for instance, Elena was taken out 4 times. Each time was different, so she doesn't have somebody who took her out more than other people. Kai, however, does. Bonnie. There's my female representation. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Bonnie, for your service. I'm sorry for the way that the show treated you. Okay. 11th place, we got a lot of people now. Bonnie and Enzo are tied here. We have one more leading perpetrator for Enzo. Who took him out the most? Stefan. Salvatore Boy's just running around. Everybody who was taken out twice is tied for 16th place. Everybody who was taken out once, tied for 58. A lot of people. We're talking about who's taking people out. We're talking about who's being taken out. Now we're going to talk about how. This feels so dark. I'm just going to keep it up here. I really wanted to do the stats on what are the chances of surviving. Just didn't have the data. We had to do it backwards. This is going to feel like a really big bummer. We're just going to keep it up here. Okay, these are fictional deaths. We are not making light of real tragedies. Okay, we're up here. We're having a good time. All right, number 1, person got their blood sucked. Statistically speaking, 22% chance of that being the way that we go out. All right, number 2, burned alive. 17% chance next blood loss. You know what? You can just look at the list. You can look at the list. I don't want to get into this. For everybody that got taken out, they got put into one of these buckets. And then you have the probability of that being how we get taken out once we get to the model based on all of the counts for each one. I had to put every single incident into one of these buckets, so it got a little bit tricky for some, but I included natural causes, overexertion using magic. I couldn't really find another bucket to put that one, so that one got its own, as well as being absorbed. People start absorbing each other's essences in the later seasons. Don't remember that, as well as being siphoned of magic, and then also a boat accident. Those are some of the ones I thought were noteworthy. Those are all of the stats, and then now, because numbers have always made more sense to me than people, I did build a model of it. Let's get into it. Why do I do this? I need to stop because ultimately this doesn't even seem like a good format to do this at, because you yourselves cannot actually play in the spreadsheet. It's fun to play in the spreadsheet, okay? So I don't know if we'll keep doing this moving forward or not, but it just does make sense. The whole point is statistically breaking it down and saying, okay, we met our fate in this show. looking at all the stats and saying, based on what happened in the show, this is what's most likely to occur. So I had to build it out. It ended up getting kind of gnarly in a very fun way, actually, because you have to take into account, were they being compelled? Were they being controlled in some way? Did I get resurrected? There are all of these things that ended up having to be accounted for, and I did account for all of them. I'm very proud of this. I built this whole thing using macros. So everything is going to be based on that cleaned up data set, not the raw one, but the cleaned up data set that we went through, based on these characters took out these amount of people. These were the ways that they did it. These were the times that they were being compelled. These were the people that got resurrected. All of that math is in here. Every button that I click on is going to run 100 simulations. And then based on the chances of each outcome occurring, so who took me out? Damon took out 19% of people. Stefan took out 17% of people. Based on the chances everyone had, it's going to pick one of those outcomes and tell us what happened in that specific outcome. Yeah, this is dark, keeping it up here. This is a Saturday, we're having fun. We have met our end in the early 2000s show, The Vampire Diaries. How did we go? We got our blood sucked. A good way to go on a vampire show. Classic. This is the most popular way as well. This show context button is going to pull, you remember the data set? I'll pull it up. These were all pulled from that website. So based on the way that we got taken out, it's going to pull a random example for the show context. This is just whatever blurb the article put for each incident. So for example, for this one, blood sucked out by Damon Salvatore, that is not actually real for us, okay? We're not saying that Damon Salvatore did it. I still need to run the model to figure out who took us out. That's just what the show context pulled, and it didn't end up being meaningful in this circumstance. Some of them had more details or more context. This one didn't. Okay, who did this based on everyone who got taken out? Who do you guys want? I'd love to see a woman up there. Maybe Catherine. Girl power. Slay power. Stefan. Okay, that's okay. It's okay, Stefan. I forgive you. The anybody else button is going to tell us if anybody else helped Stefan, in which case that means multiple people took us out, but that did happen in the show. I counted for it mathematically. Did anybody else help him? I'm going to feel ganged up on. I don't want that. No. So then to pull all of the formulas and get everything working correctly so that if somebody did help him or if they were possessed or if they were compelled, which the chances of that happening is so low, then getting the who button to work, y'all don't even know. Was Stefan possessed when he took us out? I'm really hoping it was not his choice. I'm hoping his hands were tied. Nope. He could have still been compelled. Stefan. He's like my favorite character. This is not nice. He wasn't even, nope, he just did it. Were we resurrected? We want a yes here. You know that. No, that was it. And I know what you're thinking. Gracie, why did you do all of that work for something as simple as Stefan sucked our blood out? Because we're not done. That's right. This is going to pull a completely random episode now. This is not based on any probability. This is purely a random episode. Just going to say what episode did we go out in. We went on the season 6 premiere. We made it 5 seasons. It's pretty good. Yo, that's pretty good. Pretty high turnover rate in this show. I'm happy with that. Do not come for me with the fact that that little photo is so low quality. The fact that I got this Excel to pull in the photo in the episode description through a macros, just in an Excel sheet, it's doing it by itself. Quality of that photo, none of my business. None of my business. I got that to happen. That's it. We're done. I clocked out. What happens in this episode? I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay, the girlies are in sophomore year at Whitmore. Damon is gone. Tyler is human once again. I don't remember any of this. Alaric is struggling to adjust to his new life as a vampire. Alaric became a vampire? Y'all. Alaric meets Joe in this episode. Okay, that's good lore. I mean, going out in a premiere episode is pretty good, okay? That means that they needed high stakes to promote the first episode of the season, and they said, let's take out this beloved character. It's pretty good. Who else got taken out in this episode? No one. No one else. Just us. Just us. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That means that our going out was meaningful enough. We were it. They didn't need anybody else to raise the stakes. Just us. We were beloved. All right, just because I spent a lot of time on this. One more time. That was a practice round. One more time. Okay, what was our fate? I don't want to say that out loud. In a supernatural paranormal show, that feels disrespectful, almost. Show context for this. Remember that it wouldn't actually be Matt who's responsible, just pulling in a description for context, but with a wooden bullet. Ow. Who did this? Who are we gonna get? Okay, we got Stefan, so maybe let's get Damon, right? Get both brothers involved? Stefan, again! Stefan! Can I do the Elena impression? Stefan! That's my Elena impression. One of the first makeup tutorials I ever did was Elena Gilbert in Vampire Diaries. Loved that makeup look. Okay, Stefan, anybody else? Nope. He's really after us. Okay, because this is the second one, I'm going to make all of these populate with yes so that we can get who for all of this. Okay, so did anybody else? Yes, okay, there we go. Now we have somebody else. Who else would it be? Statistically speaking, the way that the primary count, meaning you were the main person, you were the secondary person who helped take somebody else, I think Enzo was pretty high up in the stats. Enzo's a pretty likely outcome based on the stats. Let's see. Okay, yeah, there we go. Were they possessed? We're going to make sure that he was. Yeah, of course he was. He would never do this to us. Of course he was possessed. The chances of them being possessed are so low. I got to do this so many times until we're going to get a yes. There we go. Okay. Who possessed them? The darkness. Remember when Alaric was possessed by the darkness? The darkness possessed Stefan and Enzo. Were they compelled? Yes. We got that on the first try this time, actually. So even if I hadn't played around, Stefan actually was compelled for this one. He didn't mean to do it. In terms of who compelled the most people, we know Sybil and Celine. The wording was they were sirened, but I used that as compulsion, and then there's actually you're possessed. Your being is possessed with somebody else. For the compulsion stats, I included somebody else was controlling you in some way, basically. So Sybil and Celine were pretty high for this one. Let's see. Sybil. Yeah. Sybil was compelling him. Were we resurrected? Oh! I just want to get the resurrection because the model was designed that if you get resurrected, you keep going until you don't get resurrected, and then that's that. But it's just not working out for us. We're not getting resurrected. Show context would only be if we were resurrected. What's the context for that? So we skip it. What episode? What episode did we make it to this time? Season 5, episode 21, Promised Land. So we still made it about 5 seasons this time. We're making it pretty far. Reading these episode descriptions, by the way, for the later seasons that I wasn't really watching, it's like a fever dream. Stefan and Elena escape from Marcos's control. Who's Marcos? Stefan gets philosophical with Elena about her relationship with Damon. So Elena and Damon were together for, seasons 4 through the rest of the show? So Stefan and Elena were only together for 3 seasons? No, and they got together in season 3. They got together in season 3, episode 19, Heart of Darkness. Yeah, so she spent the majority of the show with Damon. This is not super relevant to this, but in terms of characters being bad and then the show doing things to redeem them, I'm thinking of Chuck from Gossip Girl. In the first episode, he does some things that are very not okay. In my mind, not redeemable. But then the show goes, oh, it's fine. Did you feel like it was convincing when Damon was sort of redeemed by the show? Because he did so much bad. Killing Jeremy, killing the main girl's brother. We're supposed to believe that he saw the ring, right? He saw the ring. That's the only reason. I don't know. That is not good. Oh. How did you feel? Did you feel like they ended up redeeming him okay? Do you feel like Klaus's redemption arc was believable in a way where you were rooting for him? I did like Klaus and Caroline. Okay, who went out with us? Who else in this episode? No one? Wow. Y'all, it was rare for there to be no incidents in one episode. Most of the episodes have at least a couple. It's weird the 2 that we ran, nobody else got taken out that episode. That just means that we were so beloved, you didn't need anybody else. You didn't need to raise the stakes. We were enough. You're enough. You are enough. And I guess that's what I'm really saying with this video. That's a good place to end. An earnest sentiment letting you know that you are enough. So that is a statistical breakdown of what is your fate in the Vampire Diaries. Big takeaways. I'm still torn on who was the baddest of them all between Damon and Stefan. Let me know your thoughts. In terms of who do I want on my side, I'm going to be going into a potentially dangerous situation. I need somebody to be coming with me. I guess I'm taking Stefan based on the stats. I never know how to end these because I always have to look into a camera and go, so there you go. Thanks for watching. Love you. Bye.